She gave him a slave girl, but he claimed the Empress instead. The atmosphere in the Lyran capital was thick with the scent of ionized air and the underlying pulse of overtaxed machinery. Mason drew in a slow breath, savoring the faintly metallic taste, a small act of rebellion. He could almost feel the static charge prickling his skin, settling in the seams of his battered uniform. Towering arcs of living glass curved overhead, gleaming with refracted city lights, while the streets beneath his boots hummed with the restless energy of living metal. Every footstep sent subtle ripples along the pavement, veins of shifting silver and violet illuminating briefly before fading into the omnipresent glow. He scanned the city as he walked, absorbing the details, lights stuttering in half-lit corridors, exposed wiring pulsing with energy that bled away into nothingness, the persistent thrum of machinery running a little too hot. Lyran ingenuity was everywhere, but so were its flaws. It was a gilded labyrinth, and he was its newest prisoner. Restraints bound Mason's wrists, cool against his skin, their edges molded to prevent resistance, but not discomfort. They glowed with the same bioluminescent current that ran through the city's bones, a quiet reminder of his captivity. Ahead, Commander Voss strode with rigid precision, his synthetic limbs blending seamlessly with organic tissue. Joints that should have been mechanical moved with a feline grace, the only sound a faint whir that underscored each step. Voss's gaze never wavered, eyes fixed ahead, radiating a proprietary menace. They navigated corridors that seemed to pulse and grow from the floor beneath them, archways blooming open as they approached, closing in their wake with an organic hush. Finally, Voss paused before a set of grand doors that parted like the petals of some alien flower, revealing a chamber alive with electricity. Conduits arced overhead in tangled, luminous webs, casting shifting shadows across the room. Bioluminescent veins pulsed in the walls and floor, their light ebbing and surging with the rhythm of a distant heart. At the chamber's center, on a throne woven from black crystal and shimmering wires, sat Empress Nixira. Her presence was magnetic, a study in contrasts, regal stillness overlaid with subtle motion as light played across her skin, shifting in iridescent waves from sapphire to amethyst. Mint blue hair, impossibly smooth, cascaded over pointed ears, framing a face that was at once beautiful and profoundly alien. Her eyes, slitted and glowing gold, regarded Mason with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. Above her brow, a crown of red and black filaments intertwined with the circuitry of her attire, casting faint shadows across her high cheekbones. "You are a technician, according to the records," Nixira's voice echoed, not in the room, but in Mason's mind, a cold, measured intrusion. The effect was unsettling, as if she had bypassed language altogether to transmit thought directly. Mason lifted his chin, defiant even in chains. Humans once excelled at crude innovation. "We made things work," Mason replied, his tone rough, unyielding. He didn't flinch under Nixira's gaze, though he saw Voss's jaw clench at the insolence. Nixira's expression remained unreadable, her eyes glinting with something like amusement. "Our energy grid is failing. Your ship's data suggests you have expertise with power systems. You will assist." The order was given with the finality of gravity, impossible to resist. Mason almost smirked, catching the bitter irony. Their vaunted civilization had run itself into a corner, all spectacle and no substance. "I'll need a workspace," he said, making the request with forced casualness. "You are not negotiating," Nixira's mental voice cut sharper now, edges honed with command. "But your skills may yet outweigh your liability. For now, you will be useful." She gestured, elegant fingers flicking to a waiting subordinate. "Supervisor Kell will oversee your efforts. Prove your worth." Mason's escort changed hands. Supervisor Kell, a Lyran with mismatched cybernetic arms, one polished and new, the other pitted and sparking at the elbow, regarded Mason with open contempt. Kell's words were clipped as he led Mason down a branching passage. You will repair a terminal in Sector 4. Do not attempt anything clever. The workspace was a cramped alcove cluttered with exposed panels and a flickering interface. The problem was insultingly simple, a feedback loop that any competent engineer would have spotted in minutes. Mason knelt, fingers working swiftly despite the restraints, rerouting energy, patching code, and boosting output by nearly a quarter. He made a point of finishing well ahead of the time allotted, stepping back as the lights surged to steady brilliance overhead. Kell's disdain faltered. The silence that followed was tinged with something new, wariness. He checked the readouts, jaw tight, and said nothing as he reported the result. Word spread quickly, riding the city's neural network. In the throne room, a pulse of notification reached Empress Nixira. The solution was embarrassingly simple. A human had resolved in minutes what her brightest minds had failed to fix for cycles. Nixira's fingers curled on the arm of her throne. Mason's value had just increased. Commander Voss returned later, expressions set in lines of resignation. This time, he was not alone. A Lyran woman accompanied him, her beauty striking even amid the city's wonders. Iridescent skin caught the light, mint blue hair falling in a perfect wave, pointed ears peeked through her hair, and her eyes, vertical pupils set in pools of violet, flickered with something distant. Her red and black robes shimmered as she moved, marking her as someone of importance, though her posture was careful, almost withdrawn. A reward for your efficiency, Voss announced, voice devoid of warmth, and an assistant to improve it. The Empress grants you a data scribe. Mason's jaw tightened. I don't need a minder, he growled, meeting Voss's gaze with a flash of irritation. It is not your choice. She is yours to command. Voss's tone was final, brooking no argument. The data scribe stepped forward. She moved with a dancer's grace, but hesitance trembled beneath the surface. Mason ignored her, eyes seeking the surveillance lens embedded above the door. He could feel Nixira's attention, a cold, silent pressure, observing, calculating. I don't need a tool that thinks, Mason muttered, voice pitched for the camera more than the room. He shot a pointed glance at the lens. If you want to motivate me, try something real. The words hung in the air, a challenge sent directly to the Empress. Across the city, in the depths of her throne room, Nixira felt a flicker, a ripple in the still pond of her composure. She closed her eyes, searching for equilibrium. The workshop was silent. The data scribe, gathering her courage, whispered, My name is Lyra. Her voice was barely audible, trembling as she defied her programming. Mason looked at her, something softening in his expression. Mason, he replied simply. Nixira's next order came, clipped and precise, ringing through the comm. The scribe stays. Begin work on the main reactor. Mason exchanged a look with Lyra, shared uncertainty, shared resolve. The challenge had been accepted, and something had shifted in the air. The real work was about to begin. Mason lost himself in the tangled brilliance of Lyran engineering. Circuits pulsed beneath his fingertips, living metal shifting in response to his touch, the work both alien and intoxicating. The city's heart was a labyrinth of crystal conduits and whispering nanofilaments, and in this strange domain, Mason found his rhythm. He moved with brisk certainty, his mind already mapping the faults and flows of the Lyran power grid. He treated Lyra not as a machine, but as a partner. When he needed a tool, he didn't bark an order. He asked, voice pitched low, trusting. She responded with hesitant efficiency, her hands sure but her eyes searching his face for cues. Sometimes their hands brushed, fingertips meeting in a brief electric contact that left Lyra momentarily unguarded, her pupils flaring and breath catching before she remembered to mask her reaction. Mason always pretended not to notice, but he never recoiled. In the crystalline heart of the workshop, Mason hunched over a shattered relay, soldering a connection as Lyra read off power fluctuations. You're relying too much on the diagnostic output, he murmured, adjusting a cable. "It is the most precise method," Lyra replied, though there was doubt in her tone. "Precision's not always truth," Mason countered. "You hear that?" He tapped the housing, and a faint, arrhythmic hum answered. Lyra cocked her head, focusing. "It is uneven. That is not in the logs." "Exactly. Trust your senses," he said, handing her a thermal probe. Their hands brushed again. Heat, skin, alloy. From her sanctum, Nixira observed, she could monitor 1,000,000 feeds, converse with 1,000 voices, but found herself drawn again and again to this one screen. Mason's hands, rough and scarred, contrasted with Lyra's delicate, luminescent fingers. Nixira watched Mason teach Lyra to trust the intuition that Lyrans had been trained to suppress. He showed her how to listen for the faintest crackle of overloaded circuitry, to feel the subtle warmth of a component about to fail. Primitive, yet effective, she admitted to herself. It was fascinating. Their technical debates became the highlight of her day. Mason would draft blueprints and send them for approval, always with a stubborn note in his voice. "Your design is inelegant," Nixira's thought voice would intrude, crystalline and cool, echoing through the neural link. Mason would grin at the ceiling, unafraid. "It works," he'd retort. "Efficiency over aesthetics, Empress." Nixira bristled. "Form and function are inseparable." He'd roll his eyes, tapping a schematic. "Not always. Sometimes ugly is what gets the job done." It was a dangerous rapport. Mason treated her as a peer, not a ruler. He challenged her, even teased her, and Nixira, so used to obedience and deference, felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest each time he did. Through the neural link, she caught fleeting emotions not her own: irritation, amusement, admiration. A growing curiosity, tinged with something warmer, something that made her hesitate before sending her next thought. And always, Lyra was at the center of this tension. Mason's respect for her, his insistence that she decide, that she risk, that she trust herself, stirred a strange possessiveness in Nixira. The Empress had never known jealousy, never needed to. She watched Mason and Lyra, and sometimes she found herself wishing she could be down there, soldering wires and trading jabs, instead of watching from behind a screen. Supervisor Kell's presence became more perfunctory. Mason's results were irrefutable. Efficiency had climbed, outages decreased, and even the main reactor's signature stabilized under his and Lyra's touch. Kell lingered on the fringes, outmatched and increasingly irrelevant. Mason noticed, and one evening, as the city's dusk bled turquoise through the living windows, he dismissed Kell with a wave. "We've got it from here," he said. Kell hesitated, but Lyra nodded, and he left. The workshop grew quiet. Just the two of them now, shadows flickering as Mason worked late into the artificial night. Mason hunched over a new schematic, designing a quantum compression cell, theoretically capable of revolutionizing the city's entire energy storage. Lyra watched from across the table, her eyes following every line of code, every adjustment. As Mason finalized the sequence, something snagged his attention. An anomaly, subtle but insistent, a recursive feedback loop buried in the control logic. His brow furrowed. He turned to Lyra. "Did you do this?" Mason asked quietly, holding her gaze. Lyra's eyes widened. Twin pools of violet shot through with panic and intelligence. Her hands clenched on the table's edge. "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" Mason's voice was gentle, but sharp with implication. Lyra's voice shook, but there was steel beneath the tremor. "If it works perfectly, it will expose the truth. There is no energy shortage. The crisis is manufactured. To control the people, your device will reveal the deception." For a heartbeat, Mason saw the whole pattern: Nixira's desperate project, the manufactured crisis, his own role as both pawn and threat. The Empress was not a victim of circumstance. She was the architect of the lie. His capture, this workshop, all of it was a game built on falsehood, and he was about to unravel it. He stood, drawing a breath, his voice steady. "Thank you, Lyra." She flinched at his tone, but he squeezed her hand, a quick, silent promise. Then he turned to the control console and opened an unfiltered channel to the throne. Instantly, alarms blared in Nyxira's sanctum. Red glyphs danced across her screens, emergency protocols flooding the interface. Her image appeared, startled and unguarded, on Mason's display, a flicker of vulnerability in her regal composure. "You are exceeding your bounds, human," Nyxira said, her voice resonating with authority, but undercut by a crack of uncertainty. Mason leaned forward, eyes hard. "My name is Mason," he said, each word deliberate. "And we need to discuss your illusion of crisis." For the first time, Nyxira's mask slipped. She was taken aback by the intensity in his voice, by the certainty in his eyes. "You have no leverage," she said, but there was a tremor in the words. Mason tapped the quantum cell's interface, bringing up a projection that filled the room with shifting light. "I have the truth. When I activate this device, every Lyran will see it. The lie ends now." Her composure faltered. The neural link buzzed with static as her mind raced. "What do you want?" she asked, the question half demand, half plea. Mason's answer was unflinching. "I want your people to have a real future. I'm going to give them that chance, Nyxira, and you're going to help." For a long moment, only the hum of the machines filled the workshop. Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, the Empress severed the connection, her image dissolving in a storm of static. In the echoing silence that followed, Mason looked at Lyra, hope and determination mingling in his eyes. For the first time in ages, the Empress was uncertain, and in that uncertainty, the future began to shift. High Chancellor Rovin received the report of unauthorized transmissions with icy calm. His eyes, sharp as cut obsidian, barely flickered as he absorbed the implications. The fabricated crisis was the source of his authority, a carefully woven tapestry of fear and dependence that kept the Lyran populace docile. He had permitted Nyxira's experiment with a measure of indulgence, certain that a human technician could never threaten his design, never expecting a genuine threat. Now, the threat had materialized, alive and defiant, inside the Empress's own citadel. Rovin's response was swift, almost surgical. His will flowed through secure channels, rippling out to the city's silent guardians. 2 Lyran enforcers received his command and moved without hesitation. They were optimized for stealth and lethality, their bodies a fusion of flesh and obsidian nanite armor, senses sharpened, hearts stilled. The order was simple: eliminate Mason, quietly. No witnesses, no traces. Within the labyrinthine workshop, Mason worked with a feverish urgency. The reactor's heart throbbed with unstable power, every pulse a countdown. Lyra's eyes flicked between sensor displays and the room's shadowed corners, her voice trembling on the edge of alarm. "They're coming," she whispered, her words slipping between them like a secret. 2 signatures bypassing security layers. Internal IDs masked. Mason barely paused, his mind already shifting gears. "Let them," he said, a grim set to his jaw. He moved quickly, hands sure as he repurposed workshop scraps into defenses. Magnetized floor panels, rigged to lock an intruder's boots in place. A coolant conduit, rerouted and pressure spiked, ready to blast a freezing storm. A shock net, jury-rigged from spare conduits, coiled and waiting. He looked at Lyra. "Hide behind the secondary core. Don't come out until I call." She hesitated, fear and faith mingling in her eyes, but nodded and slipped into the shadows. The air grew tense, every surface humming with potential violence. The first enforcer appeared, emerging from cloaked silence, form flickering into existence just inside the door. Fluid and inhumanly graceful, he scanned the room, sensing only cold calculations. His boot hit the magnetized panel, and suddenly he was anchored. foot locked tight to the floor, servos whining as he tried to break free. The second enforcer flowed in behind him, ghost-like, but as she passed the coolant conduit, Mason triggered the release. A jet of liquid nitrogen erupted, blanketing her in shimmering frost. She staggered, joints freezing, but managed to draw a weapon, a plasma blade sparking to life in her hand, burning through the haze. The first enforcer, struggling against the magnet, reached for his own blade. Mason threw the shock net, aiming true. It tangled around the enforcer's torso, arcs of electricity stuttering through his armor, disrupting his systems. He dropped to one knee, spasming as the charge pulsed. The second, half frozen but relentless, advanced with the plasma blade. Mason ducked behind the reactor, grabbed a heavy Lyran wrench, a weapon of opportunity, and waited. The assassin rounded the core, blade swinging. Mason sidestepped, swinging the wrench in a brutal arc. Metal met armor with a thunderous crack. The blade skittered from her grasp, and Mason followed with a vicious kick, sending her sprawling. The first enforcer, still convulsing, tried to rise. Mason yanked the net tighter, channeling another pulse. The assassin slumped, systems overloaded. The second struggled to her feet, but Mason was faster. He swept her legs, dropped his weight onto her back, and pressed the wrench to the base of her skull. "Stay down," he hissed. It was over in moments. Messy, efficient, decisive. Mason stood above the fallen enforcers, chest heaving, adrenaline burning through his veins. He kicked their weapons away and glanced at Lyra. "It's clear." She emerged, eyes wide. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just another day at the office." Miles away, in the crystalline heart of her throne room, Nyxera watched the footage, transfixed. Every camera, every sensor in the workshop fed her a vivid stream. Mason's resourcefulness, his reckless courage, the way he turned Lyran ingenuity against itself. He fought with raw ingenuity and brutal grace. He was no longer a pawn, he was a force. And in her chest, something shifted, a spark of pride mingling with fear. Mason dragged the enforcers into a corner, binding them with industrial cable. Then he opened a private channel to Nyxera, his face streaked with sweat and resolve. "The device is ready," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. Nyxera's reply was immediate, her tone demanding. "How have you altered it?" He glanced at Lyra, then back at the monitor. "It will power your city and broadcast the truth to every terminal. No more secrets. No more crisis." Her eyes narrowed, the crown's filaments pulsing in agitation. "You'll cause chaos. Uprising. You'll destroy the order I've maintained for centuries." Mason's jaw clenched. "Your order is a prison. I'm giving your people the key. What happens next is up to you." Nyxera's neural link thrummed with his presence. She could feel his heartbeat through the sensors, wild and unpredictable. He was a paradox, dangerous, hopeful, unbroken by captivity. She found herself drawn to that chaos, to the conviction that shimmered in his every word. For the first time, she felt hope, a possibility she had not calculated. She warned, "Roven and his allies will not allow this. Their power is built on the lie." Mason didn't flinch. "They'll try to stop us. But a ruler fighting for her people? That's a story worth telling. You have to choose, Nyxera. Stand with me or step aside." The words hung between them, sharp as a blade. Nyxera's internal alarms blared, warning her of political fallout, personal risk, the threat to her dynasty. She silenced them with a thought. For once, she was guided not by logic, but by feeling. Mason's conviction was contagious, burning through her calculations and awakening something deeper. She took a breath, her decision crystallizing. "The demonstration is set for the next cycle," she said, voice low but resolute. "Do not fail me, Mason." As the channel closed, Nyxera lingered, staring at her reflection in the obsidian glass. For the first time, the future was uncertain, but it was her choice to make. The assembly hall was a display of Lyran grandeur, a cathedral of light and shadow, carved from living crystal and streaked with veins of luminous circuitry. Nobles hovered on anti-grav thrones in concentric circles, their faces half concealed behind shimmering veils, masks of indifference hiding the fevered speculation behind their eyes. Each movement was measured, each word calculated, the air heavy with anticipation and a current of unspoken threat. At the chamber's heart, Mason's device thrummed, a squat, angular engine of alloy and scavenged Lyran parts. It looked awkward and undeniably human, an eyesore against the elegance of Lyran design, but its presence commanded attention. The entire hall seemed to pulse with its latent energy, the promise of change vibrating in the floor. High Chancellor Rovan stood at Nixira's side, his posture rigid, his gaze sweeping the nobles with icy authority. His commands rippled through hidden channels, silent signals to loyal operatives buried in the crowd. Nixira sat on her obsidian throne, resplendent in red and black. Her attire shimmered like a living flame, the filaments of her crown pulsing in time with the city's heartbeat. Yet Mason, across the chamber, saw the tension beneath her poise. The way her fingers flexed, the careful control in her expression. Their eyes met. In that moment, the rest of the hall faded. She gave the smallest of nods, barely perceptible, but for Mason, it was everything. He approached the device, hands steady, every movement deliberate. He placed his palm against the main panel. The room fell silent, expectant. A single word from Nixira, soft but carrying. Begin. Mason pressed the sequence. The device came alive with a deep, resonant hum. Energy surged, radiating out in waves, visible as a shimmering aurora that leapt from the device to the crystalline spires overhead. Across the city, lights blazed to full brilliance. Machines long dormant sputtered to life. For the first time in generations, power flowed freely, unbound by restriction or ration. The city exhaled, an audible gasp that traveled through the network of streets and towers. Simultaneously, a torrent of data flooded every terminal and neural feed. Raw information, records, conversations, hidden orders raced through the city's veins. The manufactured crisis, the web of lies and control, was exposed in a relentless stream. Citizens, nobles, even the guards in the hall clutched their heads as the truth crashed over them. A psychic shockwave rippled through the assembly. Whispers turned to shouts. Masks slipped, revealing faces contorted in confusion and rage. Rovan reacted instantly, voice a hiss that carried only to those attuned. Now! Elite guards materialized, stepping from the shadows, weapons drawn and leveled not at Mason, but at Nixira herself. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. Betrayal hung heavy in the air. But Commander Voss and his loyalists had anticipated the move. Voss, imposing in his armored regalia, gave a subtle signal. Loyal guards surged forward, intercepting the traitors. The hall exploded into chaos, energy blasts slicing the air, anti-grav thrones spinning wildly, nobles scattering in panicked confusion. Smoke and light erupted in dizzying patterns. Nixira's eyes blazed, golden and unyielding. With a fluid motion, she disconnected herself from the neural link of her throne, the filaments retracting, her connection to the city's systems severed. For the first time in her reign, she stood mortal, exposed. She moved with supernatural speed, red and black robes flaring as she leapt from the dais. Mason, already vaulting the console, wielded a heavy wrench in one hand and a jury-rigged plasma rod in the other. He fought like a technician, targeting weak points, sabotaging power couplings, triggering chain reactions. An energy shield flared before a guard. Mason overloaded it, the feedback sending the guard sprawling. He ducked beneath a plasma blast, swinging the wrench to shatter a weapons emitter, sparks raining around him. Two assassins broke through the melee, slicing toward Nixira. She met them head-on, her body a blur. She dispatched the first with a twist, disarming him and sending him crashing into a column. The second, more cunning, slipped past her guard, blade arcing for her unprotected side. Mason saw the threat. Without hesitation, he hurled his wrench, the tool spinning end over end, to crash into the assassin's arm, knocking the blade aside. Mason surged forward, grabbing Nixira's wrist and pulling her close, shielding her with his own body. An energy blast scorched the floor inches from their feet. Amid the chaos, the world narrowed to the space they shared, the press of her cool skin against his, her breath hot on his neck. He felt the tremor in her frame, the iron will in her grip. "Their rule is finished," Mason whispered, voice fierce and intimate, a promise spoken into the storm. "I'll help you build something real. Not as your subject, but as your equal." She looked up at him, eyes bright with conviction, and something softer, more vulnerable. The words settled between them, an unbreakable pact. The battle, though ferocious, was brief. The coup crumbled as Voss and his loyalists swept the hall, suppressing the traitors with merciless precision. Rovan, eyes wild, tried to flee, but Voss cut him down with a single, echoing shot. Final, absolute. The hall stilled. Guards lowered their weapons. Nobles, stripped of their composure, stared in awe and fear at the Empress. Alive, unbowed, reborn. Mason released Nixira, his hands lingering at her waist, reluctant to let go. She did not move away. They stood together at the heart of a new era, no longer ruler and captive, but partners bound by a choice made in fire and truth. In Nixira's gaze, Mason saw more than relief. He saw acceptance, respect, and the first glimmer of hope. She saw him, not as a tool, not as a threat, but as the axis of her world. The old order had fallen, and in its place, something wholly new had begun. In the cycles that followed, Lyran society did not collapse. There was upheaval, protests in the radiant plazas, heated debates in the assembly hall, uncertainty buzzing in every neural feed. But the world did not end. Lyrans argued, adapted, and began to build something new from the ashes of their old certainties. The truth, though disruptive, became a catalyst for renewal. Their technology, once choked by bureaucratic ritual and manipulation, bloomed. Energy flowed freely, giving rise to inventions and efficiencies that had long been considered impossible. Ancient districts, dark for generations, were flooded with light. Children played beneath banners of bioluminescent vines, and artists carved new patterns into the living metal streets. At the center of this transformation stood Lyra. No longer merely a data scribe, she had become a trusted advisor. Her flawless recall and analytical mind now wielded in service to the greater good. Lyra met with committees and councils, her voice measured but assured, her presence calming in the midst of chaos. She guided the transition, diffusing tempers, offering solutions, and, when needed, reminding the Lyrans that their pain was proof they were alive, and that the future was theirs to shape. Lyra thrived, her own transformation mirroring that of her people. She was still recognizably herself, iridescent skin, mint blue hair, the hint of a shy smile, but she carried herself with new confidence. She and Mason worked side by side, rebuilding the city's core systems, their partnership deepening with each challenge. Sometimes in the quiet hum of a reactor room, their hands would brush over a schematic or data crystal. Each glance lingered a moment longer than necessary. Each touch was a question neither dared to voice. Mason respected the boundaries, especially when Nixira was present, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Mason, the human outsider, became a legend in the stories that rippled through the neural feeds and public forums. Not just for his engineering brilliance or the impossible fixes he devised, but for the revolution he had sparked. Children traced his image on their holopads, Dissenters invoked his name as proof that change was possible. The Lyrans, freed from the weight of the lie, found new purpose in the chaos he had helped unleash. Through it all, Lyra's loyalty was steadfast. She stood by Mason during heated assemblies, defended his methods in public debates, and never let the distance between human and Lyran become more than a technicality. Her admiration was clear in the way she listened, the way she learned, the way she laughed. A soft musical sound that Mason always cherished. Yet the final reckoning did not come amid the grandeur of the council chambers or the spectacle of public ceremony. Instead, it unfolded in the quiet intimacy of Nyxira's private quarters, far above the city's luminous sprawl. Mason stood by a window of dark crystal, watching the city aglow with new life. The scent of ozone clung to his clothes, a reminder of the night's work, systems stabilized, new energy conduits singing with potential. He pressed his palm to the cool pane, eyes tracing the currents of blue and violet that pulsed through the towers below. He heard the door slide open and turned. Nyxira entered, stripped of all regalia. Her skin, usually a riot of shifting color, was muted in the soft lamplight. The filaments and circuitry of her royal garb were gone, replaced by a simple robe that flowed around her like water. For the first time, she was just Nyxira, not Empress, not avatar of tradition, but a woman seeking truth. She paused, eyes studying him with a kind of wonder. "You've given us a future," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, stripped of command, weighted only with sincerity. Mason shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "I gave them a chance. The rest is up to them." Nyxira stepped closer, the silk of her robe whispering against the stone. "And to us," she replied, close enough now for him to feel the coolness of her skin radiate into the warm night air. He looked at her, reading the question behind her words. "Your declaration in the hall was unexpected." Her mouth curved in a faint smile. "I'm human. Unexpected is what we do." She laughed, a sound Mason had never heard from her before, low and genuine. She lifted her hand and pressed it gently over his heart, feeling the wild, unsteady rhythm. "This is your power," she murmured. "This chaos, this drive. It's the thing I never understood, the thing that terrified me most." He covered her hand with his own, the warmth of his skin enveloping her cool, delicate fingers. "It's what keeps me going, me. What keeps all of us going, I think." She looked up at him, her slitted eyes luminous with 1,000 unspoken emotions. "You wanted a partner," she said quietly. "A Lyran Empress has never had one." "Maybe it's time she did," Mason whispered, brushing his thumb across the back of her hand. Nyxira searched his face for hesitation and found none. She let her shields fall, no psychic barriers, no mask of authority, just vulnerability and longing. Her answer was wordless. She leaned in, slow and deliberate, her lips brushing his in a kiss that was more promise than passion. A meeting of futures, not just bodies. They lingered there, bound by the hush of the city and the current of possibility flowing between them. For the first time, there was no need for titles, no games of power or protocol. There was only Mason and Nyxira, equal, uncertain, but together at the threshold of something new. The revolution's ripples spread through Lyran society, reshaping its every stratum. At first, there were purges, swift, necessary removals of those who clung to the old order with claws and whispers. Then came the reforms, sweeping and relentless. The council restructured, archaic codes rewritten, the power grid placed under public trust. The city, once stagnant beneath layers of secrecy and fear, began to buzz with innovation. New guilds formed overnight. Artists painted the city's living walls with riotous color. Inventors hacked old systems into forms undreamed of in the stifled past. Mason and Nyxira stood together at the center of this storm. Their partnership, once an act of rebellion, now became a symbol. The narrative shifted, no longer chaos, but hope. Where once the streets echoed with suspicion and rationed energy, now music drifted through the air and light poured from every tower. The energy crisis faded, but the new challenge was daunting, building a future worthy of their freedom, a future without scripts or safety nets. Lyra, once a data scribe whose fate had been programmed for her, became a symbol of the new era. She moved through the city's core as a living archive, her memory unbound, her choices her own. Lyra's laughter, once rare, almost mechanical, now rang through the laboratories and council halls. She grew close to both Mason and Nixira, sometimes appearing at their side in the engineering labs, her voice quick with ideas, her hands deft at reprogramming a stubborn relay. She teased Nixira mercilessly about her inefficient attachment to her human partner, feigning horror at the Empress's uncalculated risk. Nixira would arch an elegant brow and respond in kind. Some inefficiency is essential for progress, Lyra. Even you should recognize that. Mason welcomed Lyra's company, finding in her the same spark that had first drawn him to Nixira, a willingness to question, to adapt, to hope. Sometimes, as they worked late into the cycle, he would catch Lyra watching him and Nixira with a gentle, knowing smile, as if she understood something neither of them could quite articulate. The city's council, reformed and wary, soon learned that Mason and Nixira were as formidable in politics as they were in engineering. Their debates before the assembled nobles became legendary. Mason's words were blunt, stripped of Lyran euphemism. He spoke of opportunity, of trial and error, of embracing the unknown. Nixira's responses were cool and strategic, her logic unassailable. Efficiency is not the enemy of beauty, she would say, her gaze never leaving Mason's. But beauty without purpose is only spectacle. Their arguments, fierce and brilliant, were laced with the same playful tension that had marked their earliest exchanges in the throne room. During one particularly heated council session, Mason declared, "You cannot program courage, no matter how advanced your code. Sometimes you have to leap." Nixira retorted, her lips quirked, "And sometimes you must not leap without building a bridge first, Mason." Lyra, seated in the gallery, stifled a laugh, her joy infectious. Away from the public eye, the romance between Mason and Nixira became woven into the rhythms of daily life. At night, Mason often found Nixira alone on one of the high balconies, watching the city lights flicker and shift like the surface of a living sea. He would slip an arm around her waist, drawing her close, and she would lean into his warmth, her head resting against his shoulder. In those quiet moments, they spoke not of politics or plans, but of dreams and regrets, confessions whispered into the night, honest in a way the world had never allowed. Nixira's reserve faded in the hush of their private rooms. She would sit with Mason by the window, tracing the scars on his hands with curious reverence. "Each one tells a story," she said once, her voice low. "You have built so much, and yet you carry the memory of every failure." Mason would tease her about her perfectionism, about her obsessive revisions and endless calculations. She replied with a sly smile, "And you, Mason, still have not forgiven me for calling your first device inelegant." He grinned, catching her hand in his. "That ugly machine saved your city." She pressed a kiss to his palm, her slitted eyes dancing with affection. "And changed mine forever." Lyra, when she joined them, was at ease, no longer deferential, but fully herself. She sometimes caught Nixira and Mason exchanging a glance and would interject with a quip, "Shall I record this for the archives, or is it too inefficient for history?" Mason would laugh. Nixira would roll her eyes, and the old shadows would recede. Together, they navigated the growing pains of the new regime. They faced riots, shortages, and the slow, stubborn resistance of tradition. But every challenge became an opportunity. Mason's unorthodox solutions, sometimes infuriating, always effective, found balance in Nixira's long view. Their arguments, even at their fiercest, were never cruel. Always, at the core, was respect. Where Mason was inspired by instinct, Nixira countered with logic. Where she hesitated, he pressed forward. Where he stumbled, she steadied him. Over time, their partnership became legend. The story of the human and the Empress, the builder and the living symbol, circulated in every household and transmission. Lyran children learned to embrace uncertainty, to find beauty in imperfection, and to trust the unpredictable spark of hope that Mason and Nixira embodied. One evening, as dusk painted the city in shades of rose and indigo, Mason and Nixira stood together on a high terrace. The city pulsed below, alive, changing, filled with possibility. Nixira's fingers traced idle patterns on Mason's arm. She was silent for a long moment, then said, "You have changed the very core of my existence, Mason. Not just the systems, but the melody beneath them." He turned, searching her eyes, the city's glow reflected in their depths. "I think you changed me too. I never believed I could belong anywhere until now." She smiled, a smile that was all certainty, all promise, and drew him into a kiss. It was deep, unhurried, a declaration not of victory, but of commitment to the future they would build, together. When they parted, the city continued to hum and breathe below them. News of their love was not scandal, but inspiration. People told stories of seeing them walk through the markets, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes lost in debate, always together. Some said the city's pulse had changed, that the very air felt lighter. And for the first time in generations, the Lyrans believed, at last, that anything was possible. That's the end of the story. You can leave us a tip or become a channel member. This greatly helps our team improve the quality of our videos. You can send a tip using the Super Thanks button right below the video. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who has subscribed and supported us. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.